Hi everyone, I wanted to tell you what this album is about, kind of the story behind it, and what it means to me. So, I had been working in the music industry for like 10 years in LA, and I've been a writer my whole life. And I trained as a composer on the East Coast and did some film scoring in LA and a lot of singing and songwriting. So, I had been in music my whole life, but I had never made Christian music, and I actually wasn't a Christian, and I was spiritual but not religious for most of my life. And some members of my family had become born again Christians and started talking to me about it, and I was not open at all. And I kind of had a negative view about Christianity, to say the least. And I was a little more on the New Age side, kind of very California, spiritual, but not really pinned down to any one thing. And I actually thought that the idea that there was one way to God, and that one way being Jesus, was pretty exclusive and just didn't sound right to me. So I was resistant when they started talking to me about it, and my mom kind of had the suggestion, like, why don't you just pray to see truth? So I thought, okay, I can do that. I was like, okay, I'm definitely a believer in God, and I'm a believer that I have a creator. So I just decided to start praying that I would see the truth about that creator, whoever he was, and that if there was really this Jesus as God, that God would reveal to me who that was too. Because at that time, it's hard to admit it, but it sounded really far-fetched to me. It sounded like believing in Santa Claus or something. And I'm a very, I don't know about skeptical person, but I'm a thinker, and I just couldn't accept a lot of the stuff that I'd heard in churches. And I'd never read the Bible, so I didn't have a lot of direct knowledge of what the Bible said, but long story short, I started to kind of seek God, and I spent about a year really seriously praying to see truth, praying for God to reveal himself to me. And at that time, I started going to a church called Vintage in LA, which is amazing, in Santa Monica. And they had a course called Alpha, and Alpha is something where you can just go and ask questions. So I had a lot of questions, and I didn't believe Jesus died on the cross. I didn't believe that he was the only way to God. I thought he was a great spiritual teacher, things like that. So I had all kinds of things that were barriers for me about becoming a Christian. So I started attending Alpha, and it was like a small group, pretty amazing experience. Nobody preached to me. Nobody told me what to think. They just kind of allowed us to ask questions, and everyone in my group was a non-believer, so like Buddhist or atheist or spiritual like me, something other than Christianity. So I would say during that time I started to become more open to it, but at the same time, like, everything I had believed before started to crumble, and that was really, really, really hard, because kind of what made me feel safe in the world and gave me purpose was what I believed about the world and who I was in it. And I just found that stuff starting to crumble as I had been praying to see truth. So I know it's just my story, but for me, God started to show me a lot of the evil in the world. And before, I had been a believer in positive things, been a believer in love and generosity and kindness and service, but I didn't really think about evil. And I didn't think, certainly not about Satan or some kind of source of evil. That also sounded like a fairy tale to me. So I think the first thing God needed to do with me was show me the state of the world as it really is, not as I wanted it to be. And it was really rough. and I felt everything that kind of made me feel safe crumbling around me. So it was kind of an emptying out and a death process, and that went on for quite a while before I came to believe. So when I finally came to believe after that year was over and really gave my life to God and believed in Jesus, which took me a long time, before that happened, it was probably the darkest year of my life during that searching period. And when I was praying to see truth, God started speaking to me in crazy ways, like through dreams, through things like people coming up to me and saying things that answered exactly what I was praying for. I picked up a book once that I thought was about a certain topic, and it turned out to be totally someone's testimony who was coming from a more New Agey spiritual background and then converted to Christianity. That one really answered a ton of questions for me. That was called Rising from the Dead. Long story short, there were just these series of events where God was just speaking to me directly and answering the questions that he knew I had. So when I gave my life to God, it was a radical conversion, and it just basically brought me to my knees to the point where I finally surrendered. And my life looked great from the outside. I had a great job. I was one of the top vocal coaches in Los Angeles. Everything looked good on the surface. It's just that something was off. I was still lost. Something was missing. And only God, the true God, the real God, the God of the Bible, the God who made me, could fill it. So once I converted, I started to pray this prayer, like, God, show me how to use the gifts you've given me for your kingdom. Because one of the things he had revealed to me was the evil in the music industry that I was working in, and just the darkness of the content and the messages being put out. And I had been aware that it was, I would say, dark before I became a Christian, and it disturbed me. More than anything, it disturbed me to see the impact it was having on the younger generation to listen to this music. I just saw an emptiness in kids like I've never seen before in my life, and this kind of desperate searching and so much addiction and suicide and cutting and everything you can imagine. I saw it. I saw it in working with young people in LA, and I felt like I couldn't be a part of that anymore, but I didn't know what would be next. So when I prayed that prayer, show me how to use the gifts you've given me for your kingdom, again, it felt like I didn't have any answers, but I had to let go of everything I knew. So I did. I moved out of LA. I felt like God clearly called me to do that. And I moved 2 hours south, and I felt like I was on a journey and that he was leading me. But again, it was still, to be honest, like really brutal, because all I knew was that I couldn't do anymore what I had been doing, and I couldn't live the life that I was safe in, but I didn't have the new one yet. It's kind of like I felt like I was a sheep who had been following the wrong shepherd, which would be all the nice spiritual stuff I believed that has some truth in it, but it's not totally true. For instance, the world is not all good. So when I just believed in love and light and wanted to talk about that all the time, that's not all of the picture. So I kept like ramming up to problems in life that I didn't have answers for. And I feel like now that I look back, I wasn't standing on a rock, where like I knew truth and that nothing could shake me. I was still I was doing okay, but really flopping in the wind internally. And so I felt like a sheep that had been following the wrong shepherd unknowingly, that kind of spiritual ideology I had. But then I recognized through praying that was not truth. So I had to let it all go, but then I was like a sheep wandering in the wilderness by myself. And I've, never felt so alone. And it was a dark time, and it was just a period of recognizing that my world had kind of been built on sinking sand. So I hadn't fully started following the new shepherd yet, Jesus. So anyway, when I started, after I moved out of LA, there were just so many questions still. And I hadn't sung in years. I hadn't written in years. And I knew I was born to do music, but when I went to LA, it was just this kind of crashing into this wall of reality that the industry was not what I thought it was. And no matter what I did there over 10 years, I just couldn't find a place for my music that made sense. Because I wasn't singing about the things that people were singing on the radio. Because even though I wasn't Christian, I was always very spiritual. So that stuff just didn't fly in Hollywood. And there was even a moment where I had somebody find my music and offer to fund the next album, and it was a 16-time Grammy-winning producer with all these crazy credits and major label and managers and all this stuff. And I don't know, I just couldn't do it. Something in me couldn't say yes. And I now know that God was watching over me and protecting me, and that He didn't design me to sing for the world. He wanted me to sing for Him and for His glory. So fast forward, I'm out of LA and still just feeling lost, even though I've become a Christian. And I remember one night I just was feeling this total lack of purpose because I had let go of everything. And I just felt like I didn't even know why I was alive. I didn't know what I was here to do. And everything I'd ever done with music didn't work. And so I just kind of felt like I was at the end of myself. And it was the end of that death process that I went through. And that night I was just sobbing and praying. And it was probably the most honest prayer I had ever prayed. And I was just asking God, like, why did you even make me? Why did you make me? And I just, poured my heart out. And that was kind of it. That was all I had. And so I went to bed that night, and in the middle of the night, at like 3 a.m., I heard this melody, and it was like better than anything I'd ever written. It was so powerful. And I got up and immediately went down to the piano, and I hadn't written in years. And I wrote the melody to Refuge, to the chorus in Refuge. And God gave me that melody. I can't take credit for it. I literally heard it in the dream, and then I just tried to capture it. And that's what I did throughout the whole process of writing that song. And it turned out that happened with many others after. But Refuge was the first, and just praying about what was this song about. And I was so inspired by the Psalms and just about seeking God when you're surrounded by enemies, when you're surrounded by darkness. And I just felt like God had really shown me darkness, and then He'd brought me out of that darkness into the light. And so that's what I had to speak about, is what He'd done for me. And it was the most mind-blowing thing, because right when I felt like I had no purpose and no reason to be here and no music left in me, He gave me that song. And then He started giving me more songs, and it was more and more and more. And it basically was a flood of songs, and they were all worship. And that's continued up until now. And it was the clearest answer to my prayer. It was like, I made you to worship me. It's like he was saying to me, duh. That's why nothing else ever worked. It's because I didn't give you the gifts I gave you to use them for the world, or to make music with worldly messages, or to try to get famous, or any of that stuff. It's like he made me to worship him. And he's literally restored my entire life since then. And I have a joy that I've never had before. And I know that I'm doing exactly what he made me to do. And so it's just like the greatest honor and blessing ever to be able to bring these songs that he's given me to you guys. And I hope they impact you. I hope the melodies that he's given impact you. I hope they lift you up. I hope they encourage you. I hope they build your faith. And if you don't believe, I didn't believe either at all. So they can meet you there, and God will meet you there. And if you hear one thing from this video, the thing that helped me the most was really just taking that leap and praying to see truth, praying to a God I didn't even know. I mean, I felt ridiculous. Especially when I prayed about Jesus, I felt ridiculous. And he answered. He heard me. He hears you. He hears everyone. And he'll answer in a way that makes sense to you. And it's something that once it happens, it's like you have this personal relationship with the God that made you, and no argument and no like logical pushback that anyone gives you will ever mean anything, because you know this God. You know him because he heard your prayers. When he answers in a way that can only be him. He said things to me through other people too that they never could have known that I was thinking. So these songs are my offering to God, and they're my offering to you all. And I hope you love them. I hope they encourage you. If you love them, please share them. Just doing this alone, there is no big label, there is no huge budget. It's just a lot of love and a lot of prayer. And if you can pray, that would be amazing. Just pray that they'll reach people, that they'll draw them to God, that they'll point them to him in these crazy times. He is our refuge. He is our strength, our peace. And I just hope that, that this story inspires you. Thank you for making it this far. And I look forward to sharing more music with you soon. You are my never rest till I rest. More music with you soon.